To entertain his friends, he made his pregnant wife the punchline of a cruel joke. He never imagined her response wouldn't be tears, but a single, silent move that would threaten to bring his entire world crashing down. Welcome to Epic Narrative Tales. If you are hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because I will be posting more creative stories just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The silence in the west wing of the mansion was Amelia's sanctuary. Here, sunlight streamed through arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. The air smelled of fresh paint, a soft, hopeful scent of linen white and new beginnings. At 6 months pregnant, Amelia felt like a planet in her own right, a secret, miraculous world taking shape within her. Her hand rested instinctively on the gentle curve of her belly, a constant, reassuring gesture that grounded her in the vast, echoing opulence of her life. This room was her secret, her masterpiece. For weeks, she had been overseeing its transformation from a sterile guest suite into a nursery. Against one wall stood a hand-carved crib of pale ash wood. A mobile of delicate crystal stars hung above it, each one ready to catch the morning light. She had chosen every detail with the fierce, tender precision of a nesting bird. This room was a promise that within the cold marble heart of this house, a real family could grow. She heard his footsteps approaching, the sharp, impatient click of his Italian leather shoes on the marble hallway. A genuine, hopeful smile lit up her face. Julian. He appeared in the doorway, a vision of tailored perfection in a dark gray suit that probably cost more than the car she used to drive. He was scrolling through his phone, a faint, annoyed frown creasing his handsome features. "There you are," he said, his voice impatient. "I've been looking for you. The caterers are asking about the champagne." "I told them which one," she said softly, her excitement bubbling over. "But never mind that. Look, I wanted to show you. It's almost finished. The nursery." Julian glanced up from his phone for precisely 2 seconds. His eyes swept the room, taking in the crib, the hand-painted mural of a moonlit forest, the plush rocking chair in the corner. His face was blank. He registered the information, categorized it, and dismissed it. "Very nice," he said, his attention already back on his screen. "Amelia, I need you to focus. Tonight is important. Atherton is coming. The man's endorsement is crucial for the Singapore deal." The hopeful light in her eyes dimmed. "I know, I'm almost ready. I just thought you'd want to see." "I've seen it," he said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a man closing a file. He finally looked at her, his gaze flicking over her dress, a beautiful midnight blue silk that draped elegantly over her bump. "Is that what you're wearing? It makes you look substantial." And there it was, one of those tiny, exquisitely aimed darts of cruelty he was so good at throwing. It wasn't an insult, not really. It was an observation, delivered with the casual indifference of a man who didn't even realize he was holding a weapon. Amelia's hand fell from her belly. The smile on her face tightened. She had felt beautiful in this dress. Now she felt like a piece of furniture he was assessing for its size. "I'll be down in 20 minutes, she said, her voice perfectly even. He nodded, already turning to leave. "Good. And smile tonight, darling. People need to see we're happy." She stood alone in the perfect, silent nursery, the crystal stars glinting above the empty crib. She was used to this. She had long ago learned to navigate the complex emotional landscape of being Julian's wife. She loved the man he was in the rare, quiet moments they had alone, but she was increasingly terrified of the man he became in front of an audience. An hour later, the mansion was a galaxy of noise and light. Music pulsed from hidden speakers. Laughter, sharp and loud, echoed off the marble walls. Waiters moved like ghosts through crowds of men with cruel smiles and women with hungry eyes. It was Julian's world, and he was its son. He moved through the party with an easy, predatory grace, his friends orbiting him, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. She saw him lean in and whisper something in Marcus's ear. A wicked, conspiratory grin spread across Julian's face. He tapped a knife against his glass, the sharp ping cutting through the din. "Friends! Friends! A moment, if I may," he called out, his voice smooth and commanding. The crowd quieted. All eyes turned to him. He raised his glass. "A toast!" He looked across the room, his eyes finding Amelia. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile he loved. It was his public smile, sharp, brilliant, and utterly without warmth. It was the smile of a performer about to begin his show. A hush fell over the grand ballroom, a collective intake of breath as 200 pairs of eyes turned towards Julian. He thrived in moments like this, soaking up the attention like a starved plant drinking in the sun. He held his champagne flute aloft, a golden scepter in his hand, and his gaze swept the room before landing with theatrical precision on Amelia. "To my wife," he began, his voice resonating with a practiced, charming warmth that made the hairs on Amelia's arms stand on end. She knew that tone. It was the prelude to a performance. A small, anxious knot tightened in her stomach, but she kept the serene, practiced smile on her face. "Amelia," he continued, "who has so graciously taken on the monumental task of carrying the next Vance heir." A polite, appreciative murmur rippled through the crowd. Men smiled at her. Women offered looks of soft, knowing sympathy. For a fleeting second, Amelia allowed herself to hope. Maybe this would be different. Maybe, just this once, he would be the man she loved, even in public. "They say that pregnancy gives a woman a certain glow," Julian said, his voice taking on a conspiratorial, clubby tone. He was no longer addressing the room. He was speaking directly to his inner circle of friends, who were grinning in anticipation. "And my Amelia is, well, she is positively radioactive." A few chuckles broke the silence. Atherton let out a loud, braying laugh. The anxious knot in Amelia's stomach turned to a cold, sinking stone. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a blush of shame she prayed no one could see in the dim, flattering light. She gripped her glass of water, her knuckles turning white. Julian, emboldened by the laughter, pressed on. This was what he craved, the validation, the shared joke at another's expense, the confirmation of his own power. "I've learned so much these past few months," he went on, a look of mock sincerity on his face. "For instance, I've learned that her cravings are a matter of national security. Last week, it was pickles and ice cream. The week before, it was demanding that our chef, a man who trained at Le Cordon Bleu, figure out how to deep-fry a Mars bar. I half expect to come home and find her eating the drapes." This time, the laughter was louder, more widespread. It crashed over Amelia in a wave of humiliation. She was taking her most intimate, vulnerable experiences, the strange, beautiful, and sometimes comical realities of creating a life, and twisting them into a cheap stand-up routine for a room full of people who saw her as nothing more than an extension of him. Her smile was a mask of agony frozen on her face. He wasn't done. He took a sip of champagne, his eyes twinkling with malice. "And the emotions," he said, shaking his head with theatrical pity. "My God, the emotions.
We can go from weeping at a car insurance commercial to a rage of biblical proportions because I left a sock on the floor. It's like living with a beautiful, extremely well-dressed, hormonal time bomb. I'm thinking of having a panic room installed. For me, of course. The room roared. It was a tidal wave of laughter, and Amelia was drowning in it. She looked at Julian, a silent, desperate plea in her eyes. "Stop. Please, stop." He saw her. She knew he did. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met across the crowded room, and in his she saw not a flicker of remorse. She saw only the glint of triumph. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was reminding everyone in that room who was in charge. He was demonstrating that even his beautiful, pregnant wife was just another one of his possessions, an object he could play with for his own amusement. She looked at the faces of his friends. Atherton was wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. Marcus was practically howling, slapping his thigh. Their wives, women she had lunch with, women who had touched her belly and cooed about baby names, were smiling, their eyes glittering with a mixture of pity and relief that they were not the ones in the spotlight. In that instant, she had never felt more utterly, completely alone. The world seemed to slow down. The cacophony of laughter faded into a dull, distant roar in her ears. She could feel the gentle, insistent flutter of her baby kicking inside her, a secret, innocent life, oblivious to the casual cruelty of the world it was about to enter. And in that moment, something inside Amelia, something that had been bending and accommodating and absorbing his little cruelties for years, finally, cold and final, fractured. It was not a loud, dramatic break. It was a quiet, cold, and final fracture. The hope she had held for him, the illusions she had clung to, they all turned to dust and blew away. Julian raised his glass for the final, killing blow of his toast. "So, let us toast to Amelia for her sacrifice, her substantial glow, and for proving that behind every great man is a woman who is completely, utterly, and hormonally insane. To my wife." "To Amelia," the crowd echoed, a chorus of laughing voices sealing her humiliation. She did not move. She did not cry. She simply stood there, frozen in the spotlight of his contempt, the mask of her smile still perfectly in place. He had made her the punchline. He had entertained his friends. He had won. And in doing so, he had just lost everything that truly mattered.
Amelia held her position for 10 more seconds. An eternity. She met the gaze of a few people nearby, her expression a serene, unreadable mask. She even managed a small, graceful nod, as if she were in on the joke. Inside, a glacial calm was spreading through her, a clarity born of absolute disillusionment. The love she'd been so desperate to protect was an illusion. The man she thought she knew was a stranger. The only things that were real were the baby beneath her heart and the cold, hard floor beneath her feet. She did not confront Julian. She did not throw her glass. She did not make a scene. A scene was what he expected. A scene would feed the drama, give his friends more fodder for their gossip, and cast her in the role he had already assigned her, the hysterical, hormonal wife. She would not play his game. Instead, with a quiet dignity that was in itself an act of defiance, she placed her untouched glass of water on a passing waiter's tray. She turned, not looking at anyone, and walked out of the ballroom. Her movements were unhurried, her posture perfect. She simply disappeared. She vanished from the party so silently, so completely, that it was nearly half an hour before Julian, flushed with his social victory and accepting another round of congratulations, even noticed she was gone. "Where's Amelia?" he asked Marcus, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He expected she was upstairs sulking. He'd let her stew for an hour and then go up and placate her with a gift. It was their usual toxic dance. But when he went upstairs, the bedroom was empty. Her closet was open, and a single small suitcase was missing. Not all of her things, just enough for a few nights. A cold knot of unease began to replace his triumphant buzz. This was different. This wasn't part of the script. The next morning, Julian woke up alone in their cavernous bed to the insistent buzz of his phone. It was his PR manager, David, and he sounded like he was having a panic attack. "Julian, what the hell is going on?" David shrieked, his voice tinny and shrill. "Have you seen the news, Twitter, anything?" "David, calm down," Julian said, rubbing his temples. A champagne headache was beginning to pound behind his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "The Vance Foundation. The statement, Julian, it's everywhere." Julian sat bolt upright, his headache forgotten. The Vance Foundation was the heart of his public image. Started by his beloved grandmother, it was a globally respected philanthropic organization focused on children's health and education. Julian was the chairman, but by family tradition, his wife was its public face, its ceremonial president. Amelia's role was to be the beautiful, compassionate figurehead, cutting ribbons, visiting hospitals, and lending an air of gentle, aristocratic charity to the Vance name. It was the one part of his life that was untouchable, the source of his pristine family man reputation. He frantically pulled up a news site on his tablet, and there it was, the top headline. Amelia Vance steps down as president of Vance Foundation, citing issues of dignity and respect. He clicked the link. The article was short, containing a single, devastating statement released an hour earlier from Amelia's personal email. "It is with a heavy heart that I announce my immediate resignation as president of the Vance Foundation. I continue to believe passionately in its mission to protect and nurture children. It is for this reason that I have come to believe I cannot, in good conscience, continue to represent this noble cause while associated with environments where the core values of dignity, kindness, and mutual respect are not upheld. I am taking this time to focus on my own health and the well-being of my unborn child, and I ask for privacy." It was a masterpiece of strategic destruction. It accused no one. It named no names. It gave no details. But in its quiet, elegant simplicity, it said everything. It was a perfectly aimed torpedo that struck his reputation right below the waterline. He, Julian Vance, the chairman of a foundation built on kindness, was presiding over an environment where dignity and respect were not valued. And the accusation was coming from his own pregnant wife, the one person whose integrity was seen as unimpeachable. The phone buzzed again. It was a text from Atherton. "What is this? Is she trying to blackmail you?" Another from Marcus. "Dude, my wife is asking questions. You need to fix this." The story was exploding. The narrative was simple and irresistible. The gentle, pregnant philanthropist fleeing a toxic environment created by her powerful husband. His phone began to ring incessantly. Reporters, board members, his father. The humiliation he had so casually inflicted on Amelia the night before was now boomeranging back to him, magnified 1,000 times over. The days that followed were a crucible for Julian Vance. For the first time, he was truly alone. He cut off communication with his so-called friends, ignoring Atherton's blustering calls and Marcus's sycophantic, probing texts. Their voices now sounded hollow, echoes from a life he no longer recognized. He sat in his silent, sterile mansion, the grand ballroom where he had committed his act of casual cruelty, now feeling like a tomb. Amelia's demand echoed in the silence. "I want you to feel the consequences." It was a simple, impossible request. For his entire life, his wealth and power had been a shield, insulating him from the genuine, painful consequences of his actions. To do what she asked meant voluntarily laying that shield down and walking out into the battlefield of public opinion completely unarmed. He fought it. His pride, a monstrous, lifelong companion, screamed at him. It told him to fight her, to release his own statement, to paint her as unstable, to use his immense resources to crush her quiet rebellion. But then he would remember the look in her eyes in that hotel room, not of anger, but of pity and profound disappointment. He would think of the empty nursery upstairs, a silent monument to a future he had torched for a cheap laugh. After a week of self-imposed isolation and agonizing self-reflection, he made a decision. He called his PR team and gave them a single, non-negotiable instruction. He was going to give a live, unscripted interview. Not to a friendly business channel, but to Sarah Jensen, a famously tough, investigative journalist known for her inability to be bought or intimidated. The world watched, expecting a carefully crafted performance. Instead, they saw a man stripped bare. Julian sat opposite the journalist, not in a power suit, but in a simple dark sweater. The arrogant smirk was gone. The easy, confident charm was gone. He looked tired, humbled, and profoundly human. "Mr. Vance," Jensen began, her voice sharp, "your wife's resignation has led to rampant speculation. What is your response to the allegation that you foster an environment where dignity and respect are not valued?" Julian looked directly into the camera, but he wasn't speaking to the millions of viewers. He was speaking to an audience of one. "It's not an allegation," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "It's the truth. The environment she was referring to was me." The admission was a collective shockwave. He went on, not making excuses, not minimizing, but simply confessing. He told the story of the party, of the toast, of the cruel jokes he had made at the expense of his pregnant wife. "I did it to get a laugh," he said, his voice thick with a shame that was clearly unfeigned. "I used my wife's vulnerability as a punchline to entertain men I called my friends. It was a monstrous, cruel, and deeply cowardly thing to do." She responded not with anger, but with a quiet courage I have never known. "She was right to leave, and I am profoundly sorry. Not just for my words that night, but for the years of smaller, quieter cruelties that led to them. I failed her as a husband, and I failed as a man." He announced he was taking an indefinite leave of absence from his company and was permanently stepping down as chairman of the Vance Foundation. Then Eleanor Vance's legal team released a follow-up statement. A post-nuptial agreement had been signed. In it, he had voluntarily transferred his controlling interest in the foundation, the shares and voting power he inherited, directly to Amelia, making her not just its ceremonial president, but its majority stakeholder. He had not just apologized, he had given her his power. It was an act of profound and permanent restitution. 3 months later, Amelia was in the nursery, the late afternoon sun casting long, gentle stripes across the floor. She was huge with child now, a beautiful, serene planet on the verge of creating a new world. She gently rocked in the chair, her hand resting on her belly, when a soft knock came at the door. It was Julian. He looked different. The sharp, restless energy was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness. He had been in intensive therapy, and for the first time, he looked truly at peace with himself. He didn't enter the room, but stood respectfully at the threshold. "I heard you came home," he said softly. "This is my home too, and it's our child's home." He nodded, his eyes full of an emotion she had never seen in him before, pure, unadulterated awe. "I am not here to ask for your forgiveness, Amelia. I know I have a lifetime of work to do to earn that. I'm here to ask for something else." I did a deep, shaky breath. "When the time comes, I would like to be there for the birth of our child. Not as your husband, but as a man who wants to earn the right to be a father." Amelia looked at him. She saw the sustained effort. She saw the public humility and the private work. She saw a man who had faced his own reflection and had chosen to become better. The anger she had held was gone, replaced by a cautious, fragile hope. She was not the same woman he had humiliated. She was stronger, more powerful, and completely her own person. And he was no longer the same man. She gave a small, slow nod. "Okay, Julian. You can be there." A single tear traced a path down his cheek, but this time it was not a tear of shame or loss. It was a tear of gratitude. He had been given a second chance, not to reclaim his old life, but to build a new one. It was not a fairy tale ending where everything was instantly fixed, but it was something far more real. It was a new beginning, built on the hard-won ground of accountability and grace. As they stood there, on either side of the nursery's threshold, they were not a broken couple, but two co-parents, united by a shared sacred purpose: to build a life of genuine dignity and unwavering respect for the child who was about to enter their world. The toast was over, the performance was done, and in the quiet, hopeful silence, a real family was finally ready to begin. Julian's journey to redemption required a public admission of his deepest faults. Do you believe true change is possible without this kind of radical accountability? What does a real apology look like to you? Share your powerful insights in the comments below, and please subscribe for more emotional stories about the strength of the human spirit. See you in the next story.